Peace and blessings, family. It's me, Coach 67 Sports TV. Shout out to the awesome and amazing LDBC, Lions Den Boxing community. Before we go any further in the video, like the video, share the video, comment in the comment section, subscribe to the channel. Also, click the notification bell so you can be alerted anytime I post any new videos. This particular video is about the most duck fighters currently and in the past in the sport of boxing. This is kind of continuation of my boxing series because as a boxing fan, I'm not content nor happy with the sport of boxing. I can't get the fights that I really want, the fights that I covet, the fights that I really truly want to see. And as a result, instead of just talking about the current state of boxing, because there's only like a few fighters that I really like in the sport of boxing. There's only like a handful, a few fights I really want to see, and I can't get those fights. So as a result, I'm only going to talk about certain fighters and more so focus more on fighters from the past. All right, in this particular video, the thing I don't like with the sport of boxing today is the best fighters do not want to fight the best fighters. It's all about clout chasing, maybe making as much money as you could, milking a potential fight, without actually fighting the best possible opposition that you could. All right, and it's ironic to me, I was just thinking about it earlier today, that Devin Haney is by far the biggest boogeyman in the sport of boxing. And the ironic thing is, usually when you associate a boogeyman in the sport of boxing, basically is a fighter that is high risk and low reward. However, usually when fighters ascend to a certain level in terms of accomplishment or the potential huge financial gain from fighting that particular fighter, then fighters are willing to fight that particular fighter. Now I'm not talking about fighters like way in the past, like Sam Langford or Ezra Charles. I'm talking about more fighters, as far back as maybe the 80s, but more so the 90s and 2000s. These are like the top boogeymen to me. Of course, current day is Devin Haney, and the reason why I'm focusing on him because, like I said, usually when a fighter ascends to a certain level, that boogeyman stigma kind of goes away because the reward is great. Not only the risk is great, but the reward is great. But you're looking at Devin Haney, who's the undisputed champion at 135, and yet nobody really wants to fight him. Loma really doesn't want to fight him. And, for those people who are like, well, Loma's going to fight him. Well, first of all, Loma ducked him initially and took the franchise title. And, of course, after that, Loma eventually ended up fighting Teofimo Lopez, and Lopez didn't want to fight him. And he fought Kambosos, and he lost his belts. And Kambosos really wasn't going to fight him. He was going to fight Loma. But the circumstances with the war between Russia and Ukraine led to him having to fight Haney, and Haney ended up going to Australia and beating him twice and becoming the undisputed champion. But even with that being said, Loma really doesn't want to fight him. Tank Davis doesn't really want to fight him, and Ryan Garcia really doesn't want to fight him. So you have a guy that's the undisputed champion in his division, but all the top contenders, none of them want to fight him. And like I said, usually when a fighter gets to a certain level, the risk and reward kind of balance out, so fighters are willing to fight him. So these are some of my fighters that I consider to be, boogeyman past, present in the sport of boxing. Of course, the first one is, I'm starting my way from the bottom and working my way to the top. The first one is Gary Russell Jr. Of course, Gary Russell Jr. had, he's one of my favorite fighters. He had a very impressive record. He suffered his first loss to Vasil High-Tech Lomachenko. He wanted a rematch. Loma really never really gave him a rematch. But for Gary Russell Jr., he doesn't fight often, and one of the reasons why he doesn't fight that often is basically he feel like he really can't get the fights that he want. And in his mind, Tank didn't want to fight him, so he felt Tank ducked him. He felt like Oscar Valdez ducked him, and he felt like Shakur Stevenson ducked him. So in that regard, I feel like he's a ducked fighter. Now, he's not ducked as I go up the list, he's not as ducked as some of the other fighters. All right, the next fighter in the past that really was ducked was Winky Wright. Winky Wright was a very good fighter. You know, he fought at the junior middleweight division, and he was a real tough out for whoever he fought at the time, especially at junior middleweight. You know, at one point he fought Fernando Vargas, and it was a life or death struggle for Vargas. Many individuals thought that Winky Wright won that fight, but the fact that Fernando Vargas was a much bigger star, you know, he got the decision, and as a result, people really avoided him. The only thing that really got him the opportunity he really was looking for was the fact that at the time Shane Mosley was the champion in the division, and Mosley was trying to fight a rematch with Oscar De La Hoya at the time, and the fact that De La Hoya was the star and he had the drawing power, Shane Mosley felt like he should have been the A side because he beat De La Hoya, and De La Hoya was like, well, hey, I'm the bigger draw. I don't care if you're the A side. I should get the lion's share in terms of split, and as a result, Mosley just went in a different direction. He needed to fight Winky Wright. You know, I like the fact that he took the challenge, but it was a mistake from the standpoint of, from a stylistic standpoint, it was a bad matchup for Mosley because Winky Wright, his fighting style, of course, he's a southpaw, and he fights with a high guard, and his fighting style was all wrong for Shane Mosley. Shane Mosley just tried to come in and fight his normal style, but of course, Winky Wright, he didn't leave any openings from a defensive standpoint because he fought with a high guard. He caught all of Mosley's shots on his arms and his gloves and elbows, and basically he was able to just use his jab and catch all Mosley's punches and then return fire. And basically he was a much bigger, stronger guy from a natural standpoint because he was more of a natural welterweight, whereas Shane Mosley had came all the way up from 135. He came up to welterweight, then at this point he was fighting at junior middleweight. So Winky Wright was avoided until he actually fought Shane Mosley. Then eventually he went on to fight Tito Trinidad. He won that fight. Eventually he moved up. And he fought Jermaine Taylor for the middleweight title. And of course, this was a fight where it was a pretty close fight. And Winky Wright's mind, he thought he won that particular fight. However, his style, it kind of cost him in that particular fight because he, you know, he's high guard. You know, he comes forward with his high guard. He's very defensive. And basically, he took the 12th round off instead of fighting all the way through. And basically, in the rounds that he lost, Jermaine Taylor just outworked him. I felt like it was a pretty close fight. I think had he stepped on the gas in the last round, I think he could have won and became, you know, an undisputed middleweight champion. But he didn't win that fight. Eventually, later on down the line, he ended up fighting another fighter that's on his duck list. I'll get to that later. He ended up fighting Bernard Hopkins, but once he got to a certain point, he really wasn't ducked anymore. He ended up getting high-profile fights, like I said, with Shane Mosley, with Tito Trinidad. He ended up fighting Jermaine Taylor, and he ended up fighting Bernard Hopkins. All right, the next fighter on the list was the fighter that he ended up fighting and ended up losing the talking about Winky Wright. The next fighter is Paul Punisher Williams. Paul Williams was an excellent fighter at the welterweight division. Anything but Paul Williams that really a lot of people really ducked him and avoided him at the time was the fact that he was 6'1", he was extremely long and lanky welterweight. You know, the only welterweight I really could think of that really was as tall as him was, excuse me, the only welterweight I really that could think of that was as tall as him was Thomas the Hitman Hearns. But Winky Wright was tall, he was lean. In addition to that, he was a southpaw, and he had a high punch output. You know, he was a volume puncher, he was a southpaw. So stylistically, for a lot of fighters, he just was a nightmare. And of course, he was the boogeyman at the welterweight division, and he fought in the welterweight division at the time of Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Shane Mosley, and neither one of those fighters wanted to fight him. Now, at the time, Antonio Margarito was considered to be a boogeyman also, and he was like, well, nobody wants to fight you, nobody wants to fight me, let's fight each other. So he fought Antonio Margarito. Now, this is at the time where we believe that Antonio Margarito was fighting with loaded wraps, and so he fought Winky Wright. I'm sorry, not Winky Wright. I'm sorry. He fought Paul Williams. Paul Williams, fell down early in the fight. He probably lost like the first 5 rounds, but the second half of the fight, Paul Williams really turned up. He really cranked up his punch output because he's a volume puncher, and he just got to a certain groove and a certain rhythm, and he took over the second half of the fight. He pretty much won the rest of the fight, and he ended up winning by unanimous decision, and he ended up taking Antonio Margarito's WBO welterweight title. So, he felt at that point, but hey, he's ducked, I'm ducked. I beat him and I took his title. So at this point, I should get the fights that I'm looking for against Shane Mosley, against Floyd Mayweather Jr. However, that wasn't the case. If anything, it just kind of allowed them to just duck him even more, which, was crazy because in his mind, he felt like he had a star-making performance. But of course, they viewed it as, high risk, low reward. He wasn't really a star at this point. He really was in a draw. And of course, the next fight, he ended up fighting Carlos Quintana, and he ended up losing his WBO welterweight title. So of course, this gave him even more ammunition. Now at this point, they wasn't gonna fight him at all. Of course, he ended up fighting the rematch. He ended up aggressively knocking Quintana out. But at this point, since he lost, it gave Mayweather even more ammunition not to fight him. And what eventually ended up happening at the time, he was a duck fighter, Winky Wright was a duck fighter, and they ended up fighting each other. And the crazy thing about it was, for Winky Wright, from a stylistic standpoint, Shane Mosley was tailor-made for Winky Wright. But on the flip side, on the opposite end of the spectrum, from a stylistic standpoint, Winky Wright was tailor-made for Paul Williams because the way Winky Wright used to fight, he used to fight with a high guard. Basically, the way he would fight, he would catch all of his his opposition. He would catch all their punches on his gloves, his arms, his elbows. And once you shoot your load and throw all your punches, then he returns fire and he shoot his load. So that was his style. And like Teddy Atlas said, he would put on his earmuffs and he would go defensive too long. But the problem with that is he would wait for you to just stop punching before he would return fire. But the thing about Paul Williams, he was a volume puncher. He had a high punch output, and that caused a lot of problems for Winky Wright. And in addition to that, he was able to use his uppercut to punch through Winky Wright's high guard. And in addition to that, he threw punches from all angles, threw a lot of hooks, looping punches, straight punches. He threw a variety of punches, and he landed a lot of shots that a lot of fighters ordinarily wouldn't have landed on Winky Wright. He ended up winning. Of course, eventually, he ended up moving up to junior middleweight. He ended up eventually moving to middleweight. Of course, he ended up he had a controversial fight against Sergio Martinez, and then eventually, when they fought again, Sergio Martinez ended up knocking him out. And for the most part, that was pretty much the end for him. He had another controversial fight with Kermit Cintron prior in between the two fights with Martinez, but for the most part, that was it for him. And eventually, tragically, he ended up getting in a motorcycle accident and he became paralyzed. So he was another duck fighter. The next fighter on my duck list, of course, Guillermo Rigo Ringendahl. It's ridiculous what they did to him because at the time he was the man at the super bantamweight division, but he just couldn't get any of the other top champions in the division to fight him. It's crazy because to this day, Leo Santa Cruz gets a certain amount of praise, but Leo Santa Cruz ducked him like crazy. Scott Quigg, and Leo Santa Cruz, they ducked him. They didn't want no smoke with Rigo, and it was just a shame. And the thing that used to just aggravate me is just watching him fight other fighters like Lomachenko. They talked about how he was the Matrix and how he was elusive and he had angles and speed, hand speed, and this, that, and the third. Whereas, Rigo will put on a boxing clinic, but yeah, they talking about he was boring. It was difficult to watch, and I just thought it was ridiculous. It just used to just aggravate me watching him fight on HBO. So it was just sad at the time. Now the last fighter, and of course, eventually Rigo ended up moving up weight and losing to Vasil Lomachenko, which was another travesty, but that's another story. the last fight on my duck list was Luis King Kong Ortiz, and he really came into my purview in terms of as a fighter, like that really kind of garnered my attention was when he brutally knocked out Brian Jennings. And at the time, Brian Jennings fought against Klitschko, and even though he didn't win, he had a decent performance. He didn't get knocked out. And the next time I saw Jennings, he fought against Luis Ortiz, and Luis Ortiz knocked him out. And at that point, Luis Ortiz was calling out, Klitschko and all the other top heavyweights at the time, but none of those guys wanted to fight him. The thing they kept saying was, hey, who has he beaten? His resume is shoddy. He hasn't fought, real caliber competition, high caliber competition. And as a result, they just used that just to duck him and duck him and duck him. And, the only fighter that really gave him an opportunity at the time when he was being avoided and ducked, because Anthony Joshua didn't want to fight him. Anthony Joshua just ducked him like the plague. Tyson Fury didn't want to fight him, but the fighter that really stepped up to the plate, that's the reason why I have so much respect for the Bronze Bomber Deontay Wilder, because he was the only fighter at the time that was willing to give Luis Ortiz that opportunity. And because, it was a high-risk, low-reward type fight. And, Tyson Fury, he made it clear that he didn't want no smoke with Ortiz because it was extremely high risk and extremely low reward. So that's why I have so much respect for Wilder. That's why he's my favorite fighter, because, he one of the fighters that really want all the smoke and wants to fight the best competition. So those are my top, fighters in this particular era for being the most ducked. And of course, at this point, at this day and age in the fight game, Devin Haney is the most ducked. He's the undisputed champion. And the thing about these other fighters I went over on the list, they might have been a belt holder, contender, but at no point was these guys like a real star, a big money draw fighter. But most of anything, they were only like belt holders. They weren't the undisputed champion. But in this particular context, Devin Haney is undisputed, and he still can't get fights. So that's it for this fight. That's it for this video. This video ran kind of long, but if you still stuck here to the end, I appreciate you. Like the video, share the video, comment in the comment section, subscribe to the channel. Y'all have a blessed and phenomenal evening. Peace and blessings.